All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, Capital Club members, those viewing from the club today, those joining us from home, and as well our guests. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today's session, China Road Belt Initiative. We have a great expert panel moderated by Frank Kane. So without further ado, over to you, Frank.
Hi, hello everyone. I haven't been to the Capital Club for months, which is a great absence on my part, but nice to be in touch with you Zoomically, if that's the phrase. This is a very interesting panel that we have coming up this evening. Let me just say who I am for those of you who don't know me. Frank Kane. I'm a business writer with Arab News of Saudi Arabia, although based in the UAE. And we have a very good panel indeed to discuss the vital, crucial issue of the future of the Belt and Road Initiative and the role that the Middle East will play in that global strategy. So let me introduce the panel, my fellow panelists first. We have Neil Cuthbert, Senior Legal Advisor at the law firm Dentons, who specializes in project and infrastructure finance and who has a wealth of experience of these kind of projects in the region and beyond. We have Mengjja Gao, who also is known as Monica to her friends, who drives international cooperation strategy for Etihad Credit Insurance and is a qualified lawyer in both the UK and China. And we have Marian Han, who is Director of Ideas Consulting and who focuses on China and the Middle East in terms of market entry and expansion for business. So that's a very well-equipped panel, I hope you'll agree. So the Belt and Road Initiative. I came across a quote earlier from, I think it was from The Economist, and it said that this had been described in China as a community of common destiny for mankind. Now that's quite an ambitious statement of mission, isn't it? But it is, you have to admit, it is perhaps the most significant infrastructure program of the 21st century, promising to revive and reinvigorate the Silk Road, the old Silk Road. It is a plan to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in road, rail, and maritime infrastructure in the fast-growing economies of Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. And it is also the centerpiece of Chinese foreign investment policy and a demonstration of the coming economic power of the People's Republic. I say coming, but actually it's already arrived, hasn't it? But the BRI has also encountered challenges in some areas where it has invested, mainly over the indebtedness of the invested countries. And it has been ignored or sometimes opposed by the USA, who is the great competitor to China, of course, in the global economic contest. And this plan has been going since around about 2013, but circumstances have changed drastically just in the last 6 months. So we will also be looking at the question, where does the COVID-19 pandemic leave the BRI strategy? It seems to have changed so much in other respects in the global economy. What are its implications for BRI? Or does BRI come into its own in the post-pandemic world? Will it be the thing to take us out of the economic recession that we're in because of the pandemic? So we will discuss these issues and with a particular focus, I hope, on the BRI in the Middle East, in the region, and in the UAE with this panel of experts that we have here. So what I would like to do to each of the panelists is to ask them to perhaps summarize their views in 4 or 5 minutes at the beginning, and we'll go around the three of them, and then we will drill down a bit deeper into some of their views and get some responses. And then afterwards, towards the end of the hour, we will throw it open to the Zoom audience and get some interaction going, I hope, and some feedback. So, Neil, let me start with you. So, you know, give me your view, if you would. Is this the savior of mankind, or is this another hurdle to be negotiated in the 21st century? But give me your overall view, please.
Okay, thanks, Frank. And I too am looking forward to getting back to the Capital Club to see the new renovations, hopefully later on this week. Let me just sort of cover 3 points as requested. I'll give us a general sort of Belt and Road update for the benefit of our guests. I'll talk a little bit about some of the problems that was facing the BRI pre-COVID, and then I'll look at some of the implications for the plan post-COVID, if I may. As you mentioned, the Belt and Road Initiative has been in existence for about 7 years, since it was first launched by President Xi in Kazakhstan in 2013. It's been the subject of considerable debate over the last 7 years, both as to China's motives and its successes and failures. Some have likened it to the new Marshall Aid Program, referencing the US aid plan for Europe after the Second World War. Others have been less charitable and compared it to a form of economic colonization. But let's look at what's happened on the ground with some of the projects. I mean, since 2013, China's the Belt and Road projects on a cumulative basis have grown to over $700 billion US dollars. Most of this lending has been in Asia, particularly Pakistan, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Laos, and Cambodia, and heavily in Africa with Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya in particular. There have been a number of regionalized trade corridors that have been established, the most significant of which is CPEC, which is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, that is estimated to have invested over $40 billion alone now, and sort of earmarked projects into the future. Other trade corridors include the China-Bangladesh, Myanmar corridor, the China-Mongolia-Russia corridor, and the China-Indochina Peninsula corridor. In total, there are 6 principal economic corridors. So what are typically or officially the BRI projects? I mean, there's no official list or criteria for whether a project is a BRI project or not. It's a little bit like an elephant. You will know one when you see it in the room. Here in the UAE, we've seen a number of significant projects that I think fall fair and square into sort of the BRI camp. One is the Clean Coal project led by Aqua and Harbin Electric, which is a very significant project here in the UAE. The second one is the giant Swihant solar project in Abu Dhabi, which I believe is the largest solar project in the world, and that's led by Marubeni and supported by Chinese solar company Jinping. So moving on to my second point is, what are the sort of the pre-COVID challenges that we've seen and I've sort of come across in working on these type of projects? I mean, on many levels, BRI has been acknowledged as a great success and game changer. However, there have been some challenges for China Inc. Most of the projects have been funded with debt financed by Chinese banks, leaving many of the countries highly indebted to China, with potential sovereign debt crisis on the horizon, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. China has recognized this, and only last week the government announced a a fairly comprehensive debt suspension plan for certain countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Will this be enough, or will more debt relief or debt forgiveness actually be required? The approach with many BRI projects has in many quarters been too focused on what China can give or deliver, and less on what the country in question actually needs, and more importantly, can afford. Affordability is a cornerstone of international project financing. I think China is becoming more discerning with projects it is prepared to finance, and certainly that's been my experience over the last 12 to 18 months. Most of the BRI projects that have been financed on a unilateral or bilateral basis. That is solely financed by Chinese banks and investors. Few projects have adopted the multilateral approach involving co-financing with ECAs and international development banks from other countries. Part of the reason for this is that China has had the resources to finance these projects on its own and hasn't needed to involve the other multilaterals or development banks. Another reason is that many of the projects that have been have not been financially viable or bankable in the strict sense. Typically, the Chinese banks would rely on sovereign guarantees, but what we're seeing is that many of these countries are either becoming reluctant to issue sovereign guarantees or are under pressure from the World Bank and development agencies not to issue any guarantees. So those are sort of the key problems that I've sort of seen pre-COVID. What about the post-COVID situation? This pandemic is increasingly looking like a watershed. One of those moments in history, marking the end of one era and the start of a new one. There are at least three possible scenarios as to how this might pan out. The best case is probably too optimistic, and the worst case is really too ugly to contemplate. So I'm going to focus on the middle case, which is what I call the bad scenario, because that, I think, is the most likely one where we're heading. And this foresees severe economic damage in many, many countries along the Belt and Road. The pandemic has brutally exposed the risks and weaknesses of global interconnectedness. In this bad scenario, a key issue is how will China continue to fund the Belt and Road Initiative? China faces a daunting task to revitalize its own economy that is facing severe structural challenges. Exports are suffering, unemployment is rising, and so the government's priorities in China will be very much more focused on domestic development and investment over the next 18 to 24 months. Worse still, most of the economies in the countries that have benefited most from BRI to date are in tatters. But that's not to say that the BRI is over. It remains an important symbol of China's emergence as a leading global power and a significant part of President Xi's personal legacy. Note that the inclusion of his words and thoughts on BRI as part of the Chinese constitution itself. In the short term, the next 12 to 18 months, I think we will see a significant slowdown in projects and their development. I think it's reasonable to assume that once BRI kicks off again, there will be some significant changes. And here are three changes that I can foresee. Projects will be more strategic and selective and not just based on we can build anything principle. So-called ghost projects where there is no demand for the output of the project will no longer be viable or considered. Bankability will be key. If loans are to be provided by the banks, can they be repaid? The availability of finance will be much tighter. Chinese banks will be much more conscious of the creditor trap or debt trap, as we've seen in a number of African countries. And lastly, projects will likely focus on more sophisticated forms of connectivity, such as 5G networks, public health related high-tech projects, and even remote surgery health projects. It's obviously early days. We're still not yet out of the woods of this pandemic, but I think it'll be interesting to watch how BRI story plays out over the next few years. Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Neil. That's a really good overview. Can you hear me? Have I gone?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thanks. That's a really good overview and a great intro. Let's move to Monica, please. Could you give us your look over the horizon regarding BRI, please, Monica?
Thank you very much, Neil and Frank. Maybe some of you know, I used to work for Dentons and work with Neil in the finance and banking team, and I've been to Capital Club several times with him, and especially for the BRI events before. And Marian also, we know each other since the beginning of my work as a lawyer in Dentons. So I'm very happy to join the session with them today. And now I've moved to the UAE federal government export credit agency called Etihad Credit Insurance. It's kind of a new entity compared to other countries. We were only established in 2013 and targeted to support UAE's exporters to do business overseas. So like other ECAs, we provide guarantees to help your payment terms and other financing needs. So I would like to give an overview of my views in Belt and Road initiative, especially after the COVID-19 outbreak. I think business naturally look at strengthening the resilience of their supply chains against such outbreaks. So this could mean for business, they look for diversifying their production, supplies, and markets. So they are kind of in a mood to save their economy in a short term, especially for international trade business. But I think as us in the experts' views or in the government's views, we wanted to support the business in a mid-term or even in the long term. So for the health of the business, actually of the whole economy of the countries, we need to look at how to develop manufacturing capabilities of one country, and in the long term, how to provide sophisticated and sustained infrastructure to support this. So I think Belt and Road initiative will not stop, because it's a program that aims to fill the gap in developing essential infrastructure to advance manufacturing capability and sustainability, and to provide all manners of connectivity in transport corridors. So ultimately, it will support international trade. So especially under the difficult time, we have to continue our work like the healthcare professionals in the first line to save the patient. We have to be active in the first line to save the economy. So now the global economy has been impacted, and also before by any trade tensions and any financial turbulence. So, so actually there are some risk issues for businesses, including but not limited to defaults, corporate insolvencies, geopolitical risk, and also ultimately the lack of confidence in doing businesses. So particularly from my company's point of view as the ECA, we wanted to support business continuously. So we look at any solutions we can provide to expand our exposure of risk and to provide supply financing, guarantee support. So we also aim to encourage people to continue to do business in the UAE and don't move out of this country, because UAE's location is like in the center of the Silk Road, even from the history. And I can still give you some figures of last year and this year, the trade between UAE and particularly with China, that the non-oil bilateral trade between UAE and China is $50 billion in 2019, with a 16% increase from 2018. And even the first quarter of this year, it didn't stop. The UAE export to China accounts for $4 billion, while Chinese export to UAE is around $6.5 billion. And the new infrastructure contracts actually was signed at the amount of around $1.7 billion. So you can see in the first quarter, the business didn't stop. And especially in the UAE, since the manufacturing is only 8% of the UAE GDP, so the supply has to be diverse and international. So the UAE government actually looked at a broader international cooperation. So the BRI initiative is very important that we look at to cooperate with any countries in the route. Like that Thursday, our Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation just attended the virtual conference held, initiated by Beijing of the Belt and Road Initiative conference to discuss the joint actions to combat COVID-19. So UAE is still in the right position and at the center of the BRI to continue to support the business. And also, when we look at the project pipelines, as also Neil mentioned, we have to be careful to select which projects we should really invest into. So I think during good time or bad time, the infrastructure is always important. So we always look at developing more sustainable and green projects. So I think the renewable projects still will be very promising for either governments or investors or anyone in the industry. And also new infrastructure. This one, as China actually promoted in the first quarter of 2020 this year. So rather than just to look at the short-term solutions, it is very interesting to see the government announce new packages to develop digital infrastructure in things like Internet of Things, smart cities, blockchain, artificial intelligence, because they know it will be the next generation beneficiary. And also coincidentally, I think many countries also announced same or similar projects development plan to develop a more digital, green, and sustainable economy. So I think even now, maybe the liquidity is quite constrained and the resources are limited, but this kind of projects will be always in the project pipelines.
Okay. Monica, let me stop you there and give Marian a chance to come in with a similar broad overview. Thank you very much. That was really fascinating. But let me pull Marian in, and then we'll come back to you. You made some very good points that I would like to dig down a bit deeper into. But Marian, let's hear from you, please.
Yes, thank you, Frank. Thanks for the panelists, and it's my honor to be here and to see the audience virtually here. So the high-level conference, this is the high-level conference happened 3 days ago, that's Monica mentioned. And out of 27 countries participated in this virtual conference. And the key word here is solidarity. So now comes the question, how do we actually understand BRI? How do we actually understand solidarity? Because I have very limited time now, so I'm going to go through a broad overview, only the bullet points. If anyone has any questions, we can dig down further, okay? So to understand BRI, there are 3 important points. So number 1, it is a long-term strategy, right? Don't ask whether BRI will change. Next year we'll have a big difference, or if the president changed, anything will change. No, it's going to be a long-term strategy. It's going to last for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So Chinese government is one of the most reliable, and continuity is the key for the any policy. So it's a long-term strategy. And second, connectivity is key, all right? Be it the infrastructure, be the road, or it's information connectivity, or digital connectivity, or people bond. So connectivity is the key, is the ultimate incentive of doing all the project. And the third one is it's far beyond infrastructure. Though infrastructure is the primary drive for BRI, however, the entire impact or influence is far beyond infrastructure. So I'm going to sort of give you a view from two directions. One is China, BRI coming out of China. The other one is overseas companies. If you want to go into China, it's always two-way. Connectivity doesn't mean China going out, but also means foreigners going into Chinese market. So the impact of BRI for Chinese companies going overseas are primarily three. So number one, it is direct investment. We've talked a lot, needless to talk more. Second would be policies. Even though sometimes the government does not give you direct investment, but I can give you policies, give you faster approvals, easy access, taxation ease. So all of these would consider to be part of BRI as well. And third one, which is also very important, is the pioneering effect of all the initiatives run by the state-owned enterprises, because many of remember in China, 60% of taxation contributed by private sectors. 80% of the companies are private companies, and they contribute to 90% of employment in China. So private sectors are the most dynamic sector in China. So if we, the majority of the business, really want to work with China, private sectors is the sector that you have to look into. So once the government has such an initiative and have some pioneering effect into certain regions, those private sectors and the companies will just follow them and go into. And I think these companies are some of them that we should work with as well, apart from infrastructure. So now let's look at some of the overseas development, especially under the influence of COVID-19. COVID-19 gave us it's unprecedented scenario. It never happened in the history. So one of the important aspects of BRI would be digital Silk Road. Okay, so digital Silk Road emerged to be the leading drive amongst this COVID-19 situation, which is also incentivized by the Chinese government. And apart from infrastructure is still very important. So apart from infrastructure, some of the private sectors, especially internet plus, or software or technology companies, they still go very fast into overseas markets. Some of the companies are developing really fast in the Middle East. For example, like TikTok. On the first row, you see the logos. For example, TikTok. Every company, many of the companies are cutting off their staff, but TikTok is expanding heavily and fast around the world. Live.me, CleanMaster are the two companies that I helped for their overseas expansion. I worked with Ali Cloud, WeChat, which is Tencent as well, to go into this market. So these are some of the software technology companies. And the second row, if you see the second row of the logos, are the e-commerce, cross-border e-commerce companies, and they have different roles. I worked with Kaola, which is the largest cross-border e-commerce company, help them to expand in the overseas market, and also help the UAE companies to go into the Chinese market. And then Shein, Jolie I worked with, and Deal, they talked to me regarding how to expand in the local market. Some of them, you do not even see it's a Chinese company. You think, oh, maybe it's just an Arabic company, a local company. So these are some of the companies. It's technology plus or software plus, internet plus companies. They use traditional business, but with a technology support. So these are the second part of the business. And then the last row of all the logos are some of the games. So gaming industry is essential, especially when we are all in lockdown, you can't do anything. So game is absolutely one of the key essential sectors. And Chinese companies develop really fast, all right? So what are the opportunities for Middle East businesses, or many of the audience, I think, today sitting there? these are the 6 important bullet points, but I'm going to focus on, I'll just say 2 of them now. If you're interested, we can dig in further. Okay, so the first one would be investment and M&A, which is the factor that we usually focus on. So now if you have project which, especially with, for example, like licensing based, finance or technology, or you have a large customer base and you have a large, you already have a connectivity into this region, we're always happy to talk about. And Chinese capitals, remember, it's not only the state capital. Private sector is also very important. So private sector, they have vast capital, they want to invest in, they want to go overseas as well, all right? And the last point, point number 6 would be plus China, meaning if, no matter what industry you are in, consider what if China? What if China? If you're in media, you're in retail, you're in sports, think about what about China? Whether I can work with China or that can be something added to my business. That could be a new role, new channel for my business. This will be absolutely another, good market for you.
Okay.
So now, right, I'll just quickly, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, go on.
I'll just quickly go through that. That's very fast. I know we have very limited time. So now I'll just give you a very quick brief on the other side for the foreigners to go into China, the updates on the Chinese market. So 3 very important things. Number 1 is the new infrastructure. Second would be the new foreign investment laws happened in China, which aims at protecting the equality of the doing business of foreign investors, and also the protection of IP rights, for example. So that will give you that is to boost the investment of foreign investors into China and further open up the Chinese market. So I will just give you some examples of China rising to be the single largest consumer market. Let me give you one example. All right. So currently, this one is the live streaming e-commerce. All right, with some of the broadcasters, they can sell really well. Okay, so these are some of the numbers. And remember, this is during COVID-19. All right, so this is how the economy really comes back, and how the new technology really facilitates people to get over of COVID-19, and also coming out of that, having some new business incentives.
Okay, can I hold you there?
Right.
Yeah, because there was, I think there was an interesting point that I would like to ask you about there in particular, because of all those different sectors that you highlighted, I didn't see energy. This part of the world is the great energy exporter. It fuels the energy requirements of China and most of Asia. Just as a kind of one-off question, do you see BRI opportunities in energy projects between the Middle East and China? Or maybe
yes,
I precluded your answer, but anyway, go. Yeah.
Absolutely. It is a very important sector. Why I didn't put it there? Because that's so obvious. Everybody knows. So that's why I didn't even put it there. Okay. I'm just giving you some broad overview. And I used to work in CNPC, which is China National Petroleum Corporation. Yeah. And I helped them to expand in this market, and help them, not only them, but also subsidiaries. Okay, so it comes back to the energy question, which is very important. And that's also one key area. That's one key reason why China has to go BRI, because energy, okay. So let's look at energy. China's oil export. China's oil import accounts for 40% of the total oil consumption in China. Yeah. And Middle East accounts a large part of the energy. So energy security for China is crucial, all right? So that's why in the Middle East, especially previously, we had the Iran problem. We had some, the turmoil, Israel and all of these problems. China's position was very, very controlled, because China always wants Middle East to be sustained, to be stable, to be safe. So that's why the security, the energy security would be would be saved. I mean, the position would be secured. All right.
Okay.
So in energy, CNPC, for example, which is a state-owned enterprises, they have large projects happening, have done in the Middle East, in UAE, in Oman, in Kuwait, in Iraq as well. So many of the projects are directly under BRI. But
Okay.
here is one, yes, but here is one important criticism. I mean, people criticize of these projects because, okay, that's government to government, all right? It's big project. So what's in it for us, all right? Of course, if you are if you are the large enterprises, state-owned enterprises, these are direct related to you. However, for most of the smaller enterprises, what are the benefits for us?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
So here, so that's a good question, an important question we have to answer. So let me give you just two simple points. Number one, for a company as large as CNPC, it's not only one branch or one department. They have many subsidiaries. Okay, it's not all the subsidiaries are taken care by the government. All right, and plus, even though initially Chinese government could have some deals together with the local government, however, the real development of these projects depends on the company its own. So as per my experience, that previously the experience, though we signed the agreement, but how to deal with, how to handle the project, who is going to be the contractor, who are we going to outsource all of the the labor problems.
These are all private sector spin-offs from government organizations.
Exactly. They also suffer. Okay, we have a culture clash. We have labor problems. So we also need to find local solutions. So now private sectors step in and you can help. So that's number one.
Marian,
right?
thank you very much. Look, I think we have to broaden it out a bit. You have answered my question about energy 100% completely, and thank you. But I think interesting in your opening remarks, there was a slight difference of opinion. I think, because Neil thought that China would focus more on domestic priorities post-COVID, whereas Monica thought that the BRI is a long-term, it's going to be with us for 5, 10, 15 years. Aren't these two views in some kind of opposition? I mean, I think it's getting to the question of what is China's commitment to the BRI in the post-COVID world? Can it afford the BRI? Will it want to look after its own for some time anyway? Let's ask Neil, if you don't mind, but we'll have a view from all of you.
Yes, I mean, as I mentioned, BRI is and will remain a very important part of Chinese international policy and commitment going ahead. I mean, it's, as I mentioned, President Xi's philosophy and ideas on BRI and its role in the development of China into a global power is now an accepted part of the constitution of China, no less. So, I mean, his thoughts have been elevated to that degree. So, I mean, I think there's no doubt that, I mean, it is going to perform a really important part of China's international profile over the next decades. And so I agree with Monica, it's not a question of 3 to 5 years. We're talking about 10, 20, 30 years. And one thing we know about China is it does play a very, very long game. But I'm firmly of the view that the pandemic has hurt China, as it's hurt most economies. Yeah. And I think there is no doubt in my mind, and for everything I've read and heard, is that China is going to have to refocus a lot of its resources on rebuilding parts of its economy that have been hurt. There's no doubt that trade wars with the US have and will hurt. Get up to that. Yeah. There's no doubt that there have been there's a very sharp rising unemployment problem that needs to be addressed. And then there's a lack of demand going forward in the new sort of weakened global economy. So I think we'll see China focusing more internally on rebuilding its own economy over the next few years. But I think at the same time, there will still be flagship BRI projects, but it will not be, if I may say so, quite so profligate going forward in it.
Yes, you mentioned the selective nature of projects going forward. Monica, let me ask you, because China really bailed out the world in 2009 with its, big infrastructure spending projects that actually, helped keep the Chinese economy going and got us all out of that mess back then. This is rather more serious. Can it do the same again, or does it want to do the same again? You said that this is a long-term strategy, a long-term plan. Just answer me that. Can it do it again?
Okay, to answer your question directly, also as I mentioned, there's a new policy plan to develop infrastructure, particularly it's called new infrastructure. So I think that is the next thing. Since also, regardless of the outbreak, the infrastructure in China is already sophisticated. So when they look at the next economy development point, it should be digital. And I should say the Belt and Road Initiative is not only about China. Now it has more than 70 countries signed to join this initiative, and it has been very global actually. So it is critical to the interests of all the countries along the route. And from UAE's perspective, actually, as you mentioned, the energy projects, actually, especially from our UAE Federal Export Credit Agency mandates, we are mandated to develop non-oil sector. So we are very ambitious to support non-oil sectors in UAE because we have the targets that by actually within 20 to 30 years, the contribution of the non-oil sector to the GDP will increase by 80%. I think Belt and Road is not only about infrastructure, it's also about international trade. And this is the foundation actually. It's small amounts when you look at individuals, but it is the interest of really of the people around the route. So the infrastructure, I think, just like the first step to provide the connectivity, and then ultimately we should support trade. So as you mentioned, whether we will continue, it's very interesting actually. Now China closed the door of the country. It's very hard to fly in, to try to control the COVID-19 situation. But there's one flagship event supposed to be in November, and they confirmed they will continue to do it. It's called China International Import Expo. So surprisingly, people think China is famous for manufacturing as the factory of the world. But because of the purchasing power of the consumers in China, now the government has driven the strategy towards import. So it has been the third year they will hold this import expo in Shanghai. So to welcome more international trading business to come to China to sell their products, rather than just to buy from China.
And that is definitely going ahead, is it?
Yes, it's confirmed actually. Last month, actually the meeting of the council of the country confirmed. Our prime minister confirmed this is the biggest flagship event that will continue to hold. And from my information with the organizer, because we are also trying to lead a delegation there, that there are more than 90% of the expo has been subscribed. So it's confirmed, yes.
Okay, well that could be a big reopening, couldn't it? Marian, let me ask.
Yes.
You also said that China's strategy here was long term and was there for the good of everybody for the long term. How convinced are you that China has the finances and the economics right to pursue that long term strategy post COVID?
Okay, right. Okay, that's a good question. So let me answer this question in two folds. So the first fold would be in the short term, okay, so the COVID-19 is short-term phenomena globally. So short term, China will focus on its internal economy, all right? However, to help China to solve this problem, internal domestic problem, BRI is one of the solutions, all right? So this comes to the second question, why BRI can help to solve Chinese domestic problem. So the whole foundation for China, there are two major drives of Chinese economy. So the first one is export. Needless to say, China is the factory of the world. So that's number one, okay, world factory, export. So the second major drive for Chinese business growth is investment into China by the, either by private sectors or by the government, but that's investment. So let's tackle these two. So the first one would be export. So export makes China the factory of the world, and make China literally rich. So which means China has a lot of foreign currency exchange, foreign reserves, and most of them are U.S. Treasury bills. And currently, China has over 3 trillion U.S. Treasury bills, and made China the largest creditor to the U.S. All right. So these Treasury bills, Chinese government has a responsibility of keeping the value, not to let them depreciate. So that's why they buy the U.S. Treasury bills. However, it's too low of ROI, so China has to solve the problem how to increase the value of all of these, the foreign reserve. So we have to invest in some countries. We have to invest in some projects. So who are there to be invested in? So we look at developing emerging economies. So BRI countries are perfect battlefield for all of these investments, and Chinese people. And China would not only invest capital, but also technology and human resources to make sure that these projects can work. So that's one way of solving China's own problem of going outside. Okay. So yes. So now, yes, you want to say something?
No. You finish your point.
Right. Okay.
Then we'll move on to something else.
Absolutely right. Okay. So now comes back to whether China is going to afford such project. That's your second question, right? Okay. So financing this project, remember, BRI is initiated by China. However, it's not financed only by China. All right. There is a bank called AIIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is a multilateral global bank. Let me just give you, let me see if, 1 second.
Okay, and that's also financing BRI, is it?
Exactly. Okay. Right. So this is the AIIB, and they have over 97 countries participated. All right, and most of them, they finance only BRI projects. And among these members, not only China, but we have many countries from Europe, from the Middle East as well, from all over the world. They are participating as part of the shareholders of this bank. So the financing, so the financing is not only done by China, all right, it's by the world. Why the world wants to be why other countries want to be part of it? Because it's an investment. I have higher ROI, I'm happy. So that's why other countries are part of it.
Okay, we all win from it. I get it.
Exactly.
Let me go to in the kind of Zoom green room earlier, we were talking about the elephants in the room, weren't we? And I just want to have a short discussion about this before I ask for some questions from the audience, because one of the features of the past 2 years, at least since President Trump was elected, has been increasing competition between the USA and China, the two biggest global economic powers. And this seems to have been exacerbated by the pandemic. Is there a danger that competition forces countries in this region to make a choice? Will they have to go east or go west, or can they continue to do both? Let me ask you, Neil.
It's a very difficult question. I mean, I think America would like countries in the region to make a choice. I think they very much see it as an us and them war with China, and I think it is unfortunate the way Trump has basically his whole election campaign. I think is going to be around the China-US trade standoff, which I think is very unfortunate. But I think he's been reduced to that because of the collapsed economy, the COVID situation, and the other problems that are besetting the US economy. I don't think countries in the Middle East will allow themselves to get into that situation where they make a choice between going east or going west. And I think most of them will try.
Neil?
I think most of them will try and steer a path between appeasement and taking advantage of what both of them have to offer. But I think if Trump gets re-elected, I think he'll make it very uncomfortable for countries in the Middle East not to make that choice, because he's very confrontational as a politician, and he will demand that sort of confrontation.
Indeed, yeah, and he may just use the China factor as an election.
Without a doubt.
Well, I'm sure he will. Marian, what do you think? Can the region live with two of them?
Well, that's a controversial question, a very sensitive one. So first of all, China and the US, the conflict between China and the US has been there, will be there in the long run, unfortunately. However, so for China, it's a new norm actually. So it's fine. It's not only to China, but also used to be in Japan, for Germany as well. All right. Yeah. So what China's position would be, as per our understanding, would be the major problem with the US is mutual understanding, because US doesn't trust China, and China also doesn't understand the US. So now the China's position would be, we need to have more dialogue, more communication to understand each other. And China's BRI is the number one is peace, right? Number one is peace. But the US seems like getting, a little bit not so easy with the whole development of China. What are we doing? But China understands its position very well. We just focus on economic development, even though the GDP per capita is only 1/6 or 1/7 of the US. So China has a long way to go, and that's the position. So in terms of Middle East, the interesting fact is Middle East is crucial to China, but also crucial to America from energy perspective. All right. So the interest of US and China in the Middle East is actually the same, meaning they want the Middle East to be relatively stable.
To be secure.
China wants, yes, to be secure, because for the US, number one, they need energy security. Number two, need the maritime path security. Number three would be the Israel should be secure. So that's the major three factors for the US. And for China, BRI important, energy security is important. So they have common interest in this region. Though cooperation would be difficult, but there's not going to be some big conflict of these two countries in this region. So for these regions, what are we going to position ourselves? There are some particular countries like Iran or Israel. They have very strong positioning already. We don't need to say, right? However, for other countries like UAE is relatively neutral to both countries. So what we should do, we should benefit from whatever these two countries offer. Simple. That's it. So that's why I love business. All right. We just see what is practical, what I can benefit from, and I just go ahead with it, because both of these two countries, the two giants, won't hurt UAE, and they won't need us. So we just benefit.
Okay. Monica,
please. Further to Neil and Marian's point, I would like just to emphasize the importance of the international cooperation. Especially I'm a manager of this in this company. Actually, I think nowadays we cannot just look at bilateral relationship. Any countries, if they wanted to be successful, they have to be multilateral, right? So just not depend on any one single resources. And also according to the fundamentals of economics, as Marian mentioned, we should be practical. I think the international trade is always beneficial for any countries to continue to do business with each other, that we all benefit from this kind of comparative advantages by doing international trade. So I hope that any businesses will not be afraid by any news or situation, that they will be continuous to doing their business globally.
So we all benefit mutually from global business, don't we? And that's probably why we're in Dubai. We have about 5 minutes left, and I don't see any questions on the chat box here. So if we could, for the last few minutes, could I just ask you to focus in on the UAE and what the UAE position is here? As you mentioned, the Emirates are largely neutral. The Switzerland of the Middle East, people have called them. What does the UAE hope to get out of this, and what is the UAE's forward-looking strategy? Marian, let me ask you first.
All right. So for UAE, the most important advantage of UAE, number one is connectivity. All right. Number two is openness, which China loves, and I think the majority of the world would love this openness and connectivity. So that's the position of UAE. So we have to leverage this positioning to offer more flexibility, connectivity to the world, and we can benefit. And also remember, UAE is leading the technology innovation in this region, which will be the next big driving force of the entire world, not only UAE. So UAE could benefit a lot in this sector, and also China could bring its capital, its technology, its business model into this region. So UAE could largely benefit, and I am very confident. And also in the Middle East, let's talk about the entire Middle East. Here is, I am largely very confident in the development of this entire region going forward, primarily because of these reasons. Number one, we have a relatively large population. Okay, if we look at MENA in a whole, it's over 578 million people. Okay, relatively large. Second, relatively young. Right? So 60% of the population. 60% of the population is under 30. All right, so young generation is absolutely the future. China is suffering from a lack of young generation now. All right, even though it has the largest population. Yes, so we have the largest young population in this entire region. So that's why TikTok is working, Facebook works, Snapchat works. All right, and that's the technology region. So that's the second reason. And third reason, which is a crisis in the short run, but it's going to be a long run, it's going to be good. So the third one would be the energy problem, energy crisis, because in the recent report from McKinsey, they predicted in 2035, there's going to be an energy shift from the fossil energy to new renewable energy. All right, 2035. It is frightening. It's very close. All right. Close. So what? Yes. So what will UAE do? What will Saudi do? What will this region do? That's going to be a frightening question. However, think about this. We have a large population. We have a young population. We have a lot to do with technology. So that's why I am very confident if the government can do a good job to adopt a new technology, adapt to new channels, adapt to new resources, and open up to connect to other regions, not only to China, I mean to all other countries. We have a bright future. I am very confident.
Neil, let me ask you, because Dubai has been the kind of entrepot, hasn't it, for financial, legal, professional services, and it really has made itself the financial and professional hub of the region. Does China see Dubai like that? In focusing on Dubai now rather than UAE, will Dubai continue to be the commercial hub in Chinese eyes, do you think?
Yes, I think it's. I think China looks on the UAE and Dubai in particular, geographical position as very enviable in many ways. I think it's got a strong legal system, particularly the DIFC. But also, I mean, I do a lot of work in Africa, and there's no doubt that a lot of Chinese companies see the UAE and Dubai in particular as sort of a very convenient bridgehead into Africa. And I have a lot of Chinese companies talking to me about setting up regional holding companies here in the UAE for their Africa portfolio. And many of the big SOEs have now set up offices here in Abu Dhabi or Dubai that deal not only with regional projects and business, but also stretching into Africa, stretching into the Levant, and even into southern Europe. So yeah, I think Dubai and the UAE, I think, are very well positioned.
Right. Monica, let me go to you for the final word, if you would. Tell me how you see the UAE-China relationship, say, 15 years from now. How will it be 15 years from now?
Wow, it's really a nice question. I can imagine how actually myself will be in 15 years. I'll be still in UAE, I think. And I'm so happy that now I have a good foundation working in the export credit agency. And I think in the 15 years time, we will continue to develop what we are doing now to, as I said, to grow the non-oil sector in the UAE and to have more profound and deeper relationship between these two countries. And I'm happy to be part of that.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you. Well, look, we've reached our 1 hour limit. Thank you all very much. I think that was very illuminating, very interesting, a lot of really important points raised and discussed. Thanks to the Capital Club for helping us stage it. And I look forward to the next time we can do something like this, to doing it in person in the Capital Club. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Goodbye.